And our guest tonight is someone whose work I've been reading since I could read.
Since you were a toddler.
I looked at the pictures. It was like 2 weeks ago. I looked at the pictures before I could see the words, understand the words, and I began to get the stories behind the words. And that's Jack Kirby, one of the foremost creators and writers and artists in the comic book history, quite frankly, who has given us such wonderful books as Fantastic Four, Thor, the Hulk, Spider-Man, Sergeant Fury, Captain America, Challenges of the Unknown. The list goes on forever. New Gods. And he's with us tonight, and this is a true pleasure for us to have you here, Mr. Kirby.
It's a pleasure for me to be here, and certainly you fellas seem to feel the same way toward the medium that I do, so I expect it to develop into a kind of kinship that I really enjoy.
Okay.
We're looking forward to it. And let me just start off going into the background a little bit with you. You came out of the Lower East Side originally, is that correct?
Yes, I did. Yeah. New York's Lower East Side. I was born on Essex Street, and my family moved to 131 Suffolk Street, which wasn't a big move in those days, and it was still the Lower East Side. And I grew up there. I grew up on Suffolk Street. I went to PS 20, which was one of the schools there. But the only thing that bothered me as I grew up is I found out I didn't like the East Side. So I began to take long walks. And I found 42nd Street. I found 44th Street. And I went further uptown. And I met the people who turned out the newspapers. I met one reporter who had upended a telephone book and was shooting golf balls through the book. And I suddenly decided, well, that's a job for me.
Now, you say that you wanted to get out of there, but certainly in a lot of your books that came later on, the Newsboy Legion and Boy Commandos,
yes,
you use those kinds of characters, those rough street kind of characters a lot.
Well, you're bound to, because I imagine they become part of what you know, what you grow up with. What life hands to you, and you react that way. And I'm glad in a way, because later on in life I had to use that kind of an attitude and in ways that probably saved my life.
How much of Suffolk is in Yancey Street?
I'm sorry?
How much of Suffolk is in Yancey Street?
Oh, all of it is there.
Yeah?
Oh, it's all there, but so is the story. I come from a storytelling family. All of the immigrants on the Lower East Side were storytellers. My family happened to be Austrian immigrants, and they told their share of stories. And I think the young people were closer to their parents anyway at that time, and they absorbed all this. They absorbed the storytelling, and many of them use it to build a professional life. I don't mean as writers exactly, but let's face it, any businessman has to tell a good story in order to sell his merchandise, and so I think that kind of thing is helpful.
Was it a rough neighborhood?
It was a rough neighborhood, and the practice used to be that you would stand out in the gutter while the trucks would try to get around you from both sides, and you'd look for somebody to fight or somebody to chase and see how you could stand up against 2 guys or 3 guys, and how many of your friends you could find that would help out. And of course that was a routine. We used to do it when we came out of school, and I had a brother. He's passed away now, and he was 5 years younger than I was, but he was 6'1" and a big, heavy young fellow, and I'd come out of school, and there was his large legs sticking out from under a pile of guys, and I'd have to pull him out, and and the situation would develop along those lines.
What I enjoyed, I found first the superhero and horror books, and then I found afterward the Newsboy Legion, similar books like that.
Yes.
But what always appealed to me about them was that in most of the comics at that time, the kids were drawn very straight-laced, very well-dressed. They were blonde and blue-eyed, and they were non-threatening. Whereas the kids in Newsboy Legion and Boy Commandos were kids. These were rough kids with bowler hats and the rest of it.
Oh yes, I admit that. I was a bit showy. I felt that putting on a good show was ideal for any kind of entertainment. I was a moviegoer. My mother took me to the movies when I was very young, and I remained a movie person. I still am a movie person. I'm still an entertainment person, and so I'll put on a show. When I draw, that's what I'm doing. I'm performing. I'm not drawing. See, I don't want to be Rembrandt and live forever. I just want to be Jack Kirby having a great time drawing and putting on a good show that might interest others. And so that's the kind of thing that's been my life. It was my life in New York. It's my life in California, and I enjoy it.
Can I get a question?
Sure.
We've heard how the storytelling started. How did the artwork start? How did the drawing start? What's your background there?
The drawing started with the fact that I could do it. I know that anybody can draw if they want to. All you have to do is want to. Now, anybody can be an atomic physicist if they want to. All you have to do is want to. I had no urge to be an atomic physicist. I had no urge to own a clothing store. I had no urge. I was once smitten with the idea of being a crooked politician because...
Before it was in vogue.
No, it was in vogue. It was a natural way of things where I came from. And the crooked politicians were having a great time, and they were enjoying life. And I watched them in the restaurants as I skated by. So I told my mother many a times that I wanted to be a crooked politician, and of course she'd never hear of that. And there wasn't anybody alive in New York at that time who didn't listen to their mother. The gangsters would call the cops if you insulted anybody's mother. And so mothers was sacred. And what my mother said was the word. And I said nothing more. But the newspapers at that time were very large. The Hearst papers were large and colorful. They had the Daily News, was a wonderfully colorful paper on a Sunday. And these Sunday papers caught my interest. And of course it was the comics, really. And I would read the comics constantly, and I loved the comics because of the color and the brightness displayed by the fellows who drew them. And they remain with me always. And when comic books first came into being, it drew me to them because I could tell a story in 22 pages much more easily than the 6 weeks it took to tell a story in a comic strip. And so I gravitated to comics, the early comics when they first came out.
You mentioned outside before the show that you were also pulled in by the pulps, the Wonder Stories, and the rest of them of the period.
Yes, I love the pulps because the pulps allowed the authors to think. It wasn't a matter of just doing a pirate story or a story about the knights. It was a matter of traveling ahead in time. What lay ahead? And what's out there? Those were the questions that the science fiction magazines fulfilled for the reader. And of course, that too caught my attention. And I had to hide the pulps I had to hide the pulp magazines, which I still have till this day. I've got them in cartons in my garage. Pulp magazines from those early years. Wonder stories. Fantastic stories.
I had the same problem because when we were growing up, a few years after that, comic books were deemed to be, evil influences on kids and all the rest of it. And I, at that time, 12 years old thereabouts, had a huge collection of your work: Marvel Comics, Fantastic Four, Challenges of the Unknown.
Yes.
And my grades dropped. And my father figured, well, it's the books, the comic books, and in front of me tore up every copy. And I'm trying to restore all the copies of your work that I lost in that incident.
Well, that was par for the course.
Yeah.
My mother did the same thing. My mother threw out all my books, and my father resented, and the parents felt that way. They just couldn't interpret comic books as something to be taken seriously. However they absorbed a child. My father felt that I should gravitate toward business in some way, and a lot of my friends did. To be worthy in my time as a young man. Well, you had to become a doctor. You had to become a lawyer. You had to own a business where you sold pants with cuffs on them, and or if you sold caps, and that was a respectable direction to take. And so my parents felt that I was spending too much time reading these magazines when I should be concentrating on the future. What am I going to do when I open a store that sells pants? Or what will I do? What kind of caps am I going to manufacture? And of course, I never gave that a thought because I just didn't gravitate to that sort of thing.
To follow up on Larry's question before, once you were attracted by the comics you saw in the papers, did you teach yourself how to draw, or did you take lessons in it?
I taught myself how to. Well, I don't believe in teaching yourself how to draw. You just sit down and draw.
Right.
And then if you feel the thing doesn't look right, you begin to work on it. You begin to work a little harder on it. You straighten the face. You suddenly discover that the eyes have a certain proportion to the nose, and the nose is just about that high from the mouth. And if you want a stronger face, you'll make it wide with a long chin, with jutting cheekbones, and of course you'd have that large round head with the kind of haircuts that day would demand. And so that's what I did, and I felt that my characters were representing real people, as far though they were far out in nature, they were true to my version of real people. The stories were as far out as the stories were. Under the circumstances, I felt these stories worked because they had a core of truth. Now, in the New Gods, the core of that story was that a father will never hurt his own son. Now, here I have Darkseid, the most evil character ever created. I can tell you, he was the epitome of all evil. All this fellow wanted to do was own everybody's mind and completely run the universe by himself. And you can't get more affectatious than that. But he couldn't control his own son. And of course his own son became his worst enemy. And there was nothing he could do about it. He was continually frustrated. And if you look through the books, you'll find that Darkseid, although his son is one of his worst enemies, and they have the fiercest of confrontations, that these confrontations will kind of destabilize. The situation will become destabilized, and the father and son will somehow find themselves in other situations in which this confrontation vanishes, and Darkseid will suddenly find himself in some other situation where he can feel free to do his deviltry. And of course Orion will try to stop him. Orion is his son. And that's one of the truths that I always knew existed. A father will never hurt his own son. And so that was the core of the New Gods. And of course it worked. It was true. I did it in the Losers. Those are war stories. And I do a story with a white tape. And if you walk on one side of the white tape, you'll be fine. If you walk on the other side of the white tape, you'll blow up, because it's a minefield.
As well as the core of truth that goes through your work, one thing that set it apart from most of what was being done then was that there was also a sense of the tragic as well as the heroic that ran through them. Ben Grimm in the Fantastic Four was caught and tormented in his body. Spider-Man, the loss of his Uncle Ben, and Captain America's loss of Bucky. Certainly all through the work there was that balance, which gave, I think, maturity to the comics.
Well, those are experiences that we've all been familiar with. We've all lost an uncle. We've all lost relatives. We lose friends. We move away from places that were completely familiar to us, and we suddenly find ourselves in different situations, not knowing what confronts us, trying to feel our way out, so we can make wherever we are livable for ourselves, so we can function wherever fate places us. And that's what and that was the core of truth in my most fantastic situations. How do you deal with these places? How do you fight 16 guys? And how would you outwit a monster from Mars? Say, suppose the monster from Mars might be look like an ordinary crocodile. You'd have a human brain. He can outwit you.
Not really elected him president, unfortunately.
What's that?
Elected him president, unfortunately.
Well, I imagine, the United States is big enough to have a lot of different opinions on that.
What's the other way around, man, with the crocodile's brain? One or the other?
Yes. Well, at any rate, what I did, my formula was simple. I just took far-out situations and gave them human conclusions.
You mentioned earlier that you always believed when you were growing up that what you wanted to do, what you were drawn to do, you could do and become.
Yes.
Was that a more optimistic time than now?
No, it was less optimistic, but very turbulent.
Okay.
How would a little unknown like Adolf Hitler suddenly rise to power? He came from nowhere. He was a nothing. In fact, he wasn't even a lieutenant. In fact, he lost the title of lieutenant. And he wasn't even worthy of that title. And yet he rose from all these masses of people just to make sidewalk speeches. And somehow he fascinated them. And of course the story of Hitler is familiar to, sadly, it's familiar to the entire world. And yet there he was, a man intent on a driven man, being intent on running things, on having his say, and suddenly finding that the entire world is giving way. See? And he suddenly got everything from Norway to Spain, and from Spain to India. And he took Greece flattened out in a day, you know. And so here was this little man who had conquered all of Europe by himself. And he had done this by swaying people. And so I believe that human beings, if they concentrate on what they really want to do, can accomplish what they want to do. But you've really got to want it bad enough to see it to fruition. And if you have that urge will materialize. It will materialize in many ways. Perhaps like your station here will someday be a grandiose network, and I'll be your leading fan, I assure you.
That's science fiction.
That's science fiction.
That's science fiction. Well, how did you conquer New York? How did you bring yourself to fruition? What was when you first knew this is what you wanted? Where'd you go? What'd you do? Did you knock on doors?
No.
Send artwork out?
No, I didn't. I simply left where I was. I didn't like my block. I didn't like the block next to it. I didn't like the block next to that one. And so I began to walk. I began to walk uptown, where the office buildings were. There were no brick buildings. There were no fire escapes. My mother once wanted to give me a vacation, so she put me on a fire escape for 2 weeks. And I was out in the open air sleeping for 2 weeks on a fire escape and having a grand time, I assure you. And of course, that kind of thing sooner or later disappointed me. I felt a lot of people liked the block. A lot of people are still there. But I was not content with that kind of environment. I can't tell you why, but I wasn't. And I began to walk. And I found myself on 42nd Street. I found myself on 57th Street. And there was one time I met the champion of the world on 57th Street. Jack Dempsey came out of a hotel. And here he was. And I was working at Marvel at that time, and I was taking some strips to Marvel. And Jack Dempsey was coming out of this hotel, and I love prize fighters, and I ran over to greet him, and we had a wonderful time. I met Mickey Walker, who was the lightweight champion of the world. Every time I went to Broadway, I met a different champion, it seemed. And Mickey Walker was also an artist, and he had artwork. And he took me to lunch, and we each exchanged artwork, showed each other our artwork, and we had a wonderful time. So I can't account for meeting all these fighters, but going uptown was quite an experience for me.
One of the first comics you worked on was Blue Beetle.
Yes.
How did you get that gig? How did that come about?
Well, the Blue Beetle was, the first people I worked for was the Fleischer Brothers, who made Betty Boop. Betty Boop was a fine animation strip, and extremely popular. So wherever I went, I always got a job. I can't tell you why, but I did. And I got this job at the Fleischer Brothers, and they sat me down at a table, and at this long table, there were about 6 or 7 people. And the guy at the end of the table would make 3 drawings and pass it down to the next guy, who would make 3 more. And then he would pass it down to the guy next to him, who would put the checkers in a suit. And then he would pass it down to me, and I would have to put the cuffs on and the spats maybe. And this went on all day, you know, until the figure took a full step. It was animation. It was a method of turning out animated movies. And they looked great in a movie.
Oh, yeah.
But to me, it was a factory. And here I was doing the things my father was. My father worked in a garment factory. Here I was working in a drawing factory. And I was at Fleischer's about 2.5 weeks before I walked out. I walked out without saying a word. And I never looked back. It wasn't what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to a place called the Lincoln Newspaper Features Syndicate. And I did a strip called, it was a panel strip, and it was called Your Health Comes First. And of course my name was Jack Curtis on that one. And it was a literary license, I assure you. And I took things from a medical book, and I would illustrate them in this one panel, which went out to about 350 newspapers. They were weekly papers throughout the United States. And I continued that for a while, but that's not what I wanted. And I began to know that. Mm-hmm. I began to know that the salary wasn't my object. My object was to stay happy. And this kind of thing wasn't making me happy. And the boss gave me to do editorial cartoons. He says, "Why don't you do these editorial cartoons?" I said, "Well, I'll give them a try." So one day he calls me in. I'd handed him an editorial cartoon, and it was about it showed Neville Chamberlain patting a huge boa constrictor on the head, and the boa constrictor was Hitler. Mm-hmm. And this had been the conference that took place between Neville Chamberlain and Adolf Hitler,
the appeasement,
which is the appeasement. And my boss said, "How dare you make a political cartoon like that?" He says, "How do you know about Neville Chamberlain?" And he says, "And this guy Hitler." I says, "Well, I don't have to know a gangster when I see one, you know."
You were right.
It was an opinion. And I felt Hitler was a gangster because he was grabbing everything in sight, which is what they did on my block.
One of your first employers was Victor Fox.
Yes.
What was he like?
Victor Fox was a very nice guy. Mm-hmm. He was a guy that created the phrase "King of the Comics." Sometime you'll see the phrase referred to me, and it's wrong. I was the first to use it because I was aping Victor Fox. See? And Victor Fox would walk all day long, back and forth. He was a short, portly man. Mm-hmm. And he walked back and forth across the office each day, saying, "I'm the king of the comics. I'm the king of the comics." And that's all he would say. And he wouldn't talk to the artists. He wouldn't talk to the artists. He wouldn't talk to anybody that came into the office because he was too busy saying, "I'm the king of the comics." And one day they discovered uranium up in Canada. And that seemed to capture the imagination of Victor Fox. And of course he closed down the business and he went to Canada to become an instant millionaire, which I don't know if he did or not.
The king of radiation.
Well, I hope he knew how to handle it. So,
go ahead.
There were jobs on that order, but they weren't lasting jobs. And it was a boon to me when the first comic books came into view. And of course, Famous Funnies was the first. And it made me feel wonderful because, not because Famous Funnies was my type of comic. It suddenly struck me that they might possibly produce comics that would give me 22 pages in which to tell a story. And they did. And of course, these magazines began to come out. And I got jobs with the early companies doing complete stories. And of course, it was wonderful for me. And it still wasn't Captain America time yet, but these companies were attracting artists. And one of the fellows I met at one of these companies turned out to be Joe Simon, and we became partners. And we got an office at Tudor City in New York, and it was a wonderful time. I enjoyed doing the work. I would create the stories, and I would create the characters, and Joe would help out sometime, but Joe was more business-oriented. He'd be up at the Timely office, which later became Marvel. And it was owned by Martin Goodman. A fellow named Martin Goodman was a publisher. And Martin Goodman had two brothers who were Joe's age and Joe's height. Joe's about 6'3", and I was about 5'2". So wisdom dictated that I stay in the Tudor City office while Joe became friends with Arthur and Abe Goodman. See, they were all the same height, and they had a great time. And so, whatever strip we brought them, it would come from the Tudor City office. So I did the stories and I did the illustrations, and sometime they would send us scripts. So they would have writers. We get scripts from DC, and we get scripts from Marvel. But I throw them out the window. I threw them out the window, which is what I once did with a violin that my mother brought me. And it was something I didn't want to do. And I literally threw the violin out the window. I happen to be a guy who does what he wants, lives the way he wants to, and I love people in general, and I see them in even the villains in my comics, to me, are people, see. And there is something in their lives that makes them become a problem to others. And that's how I saw everybody. Whatever I put in my comics, I've always had this kernel of truth. And maybe I hopefully feel that that this love for people may have been transmitted to them and help them not help them in any way. I'm not a psychiatrist, but just giving them another friend.
You mentioned Captain America a number of times. How did you and Cap first get together?
Oh, it was easy. The times were they were screamingly patriotic. What else? What kind of strip would you do but Captain America? Superman already was in existence and doing extremely well. And to me, the Times was screaming war. See? I mean, to me, the enemy was Hitler. The enemy was growing and growing, and I didn't know where I was going to win, but every day something new would happen. and it was really scary. And this is the kind of event that I felt was ruling our times, and I felt it inside of me, and it had to come out in some way. It was scary. It was scary, but it was also a wonderful scare. It's like waiting for a fight. It was like standing out in the middle of the gutter, waiting for a fight to show up.
Yeah.
And of course it was showing up. And it was getting larger and larger. And it was right on our doorstep. I had Nazis calling me at the Timely office. See, I once had 6 Nazis calling me up, and they said, well, we're waiting for you downstairs, and we're going to beat the daylights out of you, you know, for writing these stories about Hitler. These were New York Nazis, and they had a camp on Long Island. And so I says, hold on, guys, I'll be right down. And of course I take the elevator down, and but there was nobody there. I looked in the street, and of course they wouldn't be there, and I didn't feel disappointed, and I felt disappointed. It didn't matter to me one way or the other. You know, if they wanted to fight, well, what the heck? I would do it. Leon Klinghoffer, who was recently killed by terrorists, was a personal friend of mine. And I think, I remember when he was on the Achille Lauro, my wife and I read about it in the papers. And I told her that, you know, when they mentioned Klinghoffer, I knew what he was going to do. And it was instinctive with all of us. And it happened that way. And of course, he didn't have a chance. But you can't avoid gut thinking, which is what we lived by in New York City at that time. Klinghoffer and I were raised together on one block. And he owned a dry goods store. He and his brother used to work in their father's dry goods store. And we didn't think anything out. We just reacted. We just did what was right.
Yeah. And what's right at the moment is to mention this is KPFK, Los Angeles, 90.7 FM, Mike Odell's Hour 25. Our guest tonight is Jack Kirby. Cap America did, I think, embody a lot of your values in terms of doing what he thinks is right and always following that.
Yes. I don't think Captain America would do anything wrong. And he wouldn't. And even at the cost of his life.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that's a true feeling. And although it may sound fictional, it's a true feeling in everybody. I got my idea for the Hulk. When I created the Hulk, my idea for the Hulk didn't come from any fanciful place or anywhere. It came from a mother whose child was crawling out from under the fender of an automobile to the sidewalk. The kid wasn't any more than 2 years old. And this panicked the mother when she saw her child under the car. And so the mother she ran to the back of the car, and she lifted up the entire car from the back, because she had that strength of desperation. And when I saw that, it suddenly dawned on me that there was a character there that's inside all of us, that when we become enraged, that we can bend steel. I've done that myself. And so there it was, right in front of me. And that's how the idea for the Hulk came about.
One more question about Captain America, then we'll move on. What you have?
Okay, I had a Captain America question.
Yeah, just one last one.
I'm sorry if I
It's all right. It's
deviate.
fine.
If I deviate in any way, forgive me.
Don't worry about it. I have my own theory about why this is, but now I can ask the source. Finally, why the killing off of Bucky, Captain America's protege?
I don't think I was the one that killed him off.
Oh, you weren't?
No.
Oh, okay.
I never kill off anybody. And I do at times in the strip, but I bring them back.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll find out that my characters never die. And it's my own, I believe it's my own view toward humanity itself.
Mm-hmm.
We never really die.
Yeah.
You live on in your son, or you live on in somebody else, and I don't know the answer, but somehow I feel that our lives are endless.
The reason I asked was that I'd heard that Bucky was killed off because in the course of the Second World War, so many sons and brothers were lost that even Captain America had to lose someone to make it close off properly.
No, it was just story. It was good for the story, and it jolted the story.
I'm leaving now. My illusions are shattered. You had a question.
Well, my question was also about Captain America.
Yes.
At the time, in the 40s, Captain America, the red, white, and blue Avenger, who was the spirit
Yes.
of the country, was very strong. Now, what is Captain America today? Can we still? I know they're making a Captain America picture, and of
Yes.
course the character was revived.
Yes.
Back in the 60s.
There is no Captain America today, in my opinion. Too much to lose, and we've got too many terrible weapons to use. So to fight is unthinkable, and maybe in developing those weapons, we might have done a good thing by subtly confronting each other and saying that to do a thing like that is inhuman. Let's all try to be human, and I think what we're witnessing today in Russia and Lithuania and all these countries is a kind of a dissolution of that rigid, turbulent, and perhaps dangerous nationalism that existed in my generation when I was younger, and you could feel it. You could feel it in the very air that the will of self. In other words, I'm an American, see, and nobody's going to say that about America, and nobody's going to do that to America, even if I die for it. I'll defend it. And of course, we all had that will, and it was the same way in every country in the world. And that kind of thing is gone, and we're suddenly discovering each other. And I think that's just wonderful. And when I saw those Chinese just trying to get on that pole, acting just like Americans, it was a wonderful, wonderful thing to watch, despite the fact that it ended in tragedy. But for one moment, they were American. They were American college students trying to climb a pole. And somebody went and spoiled it.
Yeah.
And perhaps when that kind of an element disappears too, and it will, it can't last. It's human. Maybe something else will have to take its place because the people will demand it. I think in the end that the world will become American. And we'll all begin to understand each other, just like we have over here. Americans represent the entire world. The United States has every nationality you can think of within its boundaries. And here we are getting along just fine. And why it can't happen in the rest of the world, I don't, I don't see why it can't, really. And when it does happen, when the rest of the world become Americanized, which it already is. I mean, if somebody, a fellow like Deng in China can't last forever, and when his kind passes, I think the demands of the people will overwhelm whoever wants to take his place, and you'll see a democratization. It's just my own personal view. A democratization of China.
Let's hope you're right.
Well, I think we can probably take your personal view with as having a lot of value, since in a lot of your work you've presaged things that have gone on. You've invented gimmicks that, like all science fiction writers have. You've invented gimmicks that have come true. I was told you did a newspaper strip called Sky Masters.
Yes.
In the late 50s, which presaged the moonwalk and a lot of what's happening in the space program.
I presaged the atomic bomb 2 years before it was built, because a fellow named Nikola Tesla was working on it in Hungary, and he was experimenting with atomics. He was a physicist. And so I forget what story I put it in, but there it was. I saw it in the paper and I used it. I used it in my own way, and I got a good story out of it. 2 years later, we had the real thing.
Did anyone come and pay you a visit after that came out? Because some writers...
Yes, they sent me a letter from the FBI.
What happened?
Nothing.
What did the letter say?
It was just an inquiry, and I had to explain that it was all fictional, and that it was my version of the thing. And there was no mention of an atomic bomb in any newspaper or anything, except that this fellow, Nikola Tesla, it was in a magazine. It was some obscure magazine that I read it in, was experimenting with atomic physics.
But when the FBI paid you a call, did you think something's up somewhere? They're making one of these things?
No, I was just annoyed. Yeah.
There was another fight coming by.
I hadn't done anything. I just did this story, and it was pure fiction, of course. But it sold well, and that was my job, just selling magazines. So I'd done my job. I would presage. I would constantly read newspapers and magazines, and I would presage the chopper, the helicopter, and a lot of the gimmicks we have today. I would have them 2 years ahead, because I visualize them that way. And of course, mine didn't look exactly the way ours would emerge, but the principle was the same, and they almost did look the same, really. So I was kind of proud of that, because it made good story, and I was doing my job.
Let me read off some titles to you, and tell me where, if you can, they came from, the characters in the books. Challenges of the Unknown.
Challenges of the Unknown?
Yeah.
They came from their own particular time. They were post-war characters. And what the Challenges of the Unknown was saying is, where are we going now? And that was a question I asked in all those stories. And in the Challenges, I put in the gimmicks. I put in the gimmicks and the machines that we already had, but I took them 2 or 3 stages ahead as to what we might have. Say, I would take them 5 years ahead, and if we had certain generators or something like that. I would make a super generator of some kind and have my story revolve around that. What would it do to human beings? Perhaps it would summon aliens from some foreign planet. Gave us the power to do that. And of course my aliens weren't always hostile. The aliens people used to draw, well, they'd eat people, they'd look like frogs, and you know, and they'd never buy you a malt of milk or anything like that. But I see aliens very much like us. If they're intelligent, they'll do the things we do.
Or they won't.
Or, you know, it's their choice, I guess.
One of the true breakthrough comics from Marvel was Spider-Man, which you created.
Yes.
Where did he come from?
Spider-Man is a city character.
Yeah.
Show me the perfect character for a city. A guy who will climb all over New York. And that's what Spider-Man does. He's a guy that climbs up and down buildings. He can do it faster and without fear of falling, and he's in his element. He's exactly in his element where he should be, in a city where you have tall buildings, and he doesn't have to jump them in one leap like Superman, but he does it in his own way. He can crawl into places where nobody else can. And what may take you a week to do in New York, he can do it in an hour or something like that. And Spider-Man was perfect in that environment.
He was also, I think, well, two things, very much a product of his time as well, because that was the Kennedy period, more or less.
Yes.
And the whole premise of Kennedy's philosophy was that with great power comes great responsibility toward the world, toward those who aren't as well equipped as you are, which goes to the heart of Spider-Man as well.
Well, believe me, I admired Kennedy like everybody else did at the time. But I wasn't thinking in terms of Kennedy.
Sure.
I was thinking in terms of adventure.
Yeah.
And orientation.
Of course, at the same time, he was a superhero who, for the first time, would get colds and had to worry about his Aunt May all the time. And
oh, well, you have to make him human in some way.
Right.
You can't rob a man of his humanity. You can wear any kind of a suit you want and call yourself by any other name you like. But when you take that suit off, see, and you take a bath, see, you come out, whoever you are, as yourself. And of course, Spider-Man is the same way. He's like all the rest of his brothers. See, they're instinctive showmen. I think that all human beings are instinctive showmen. Of course, I am too, and I thank the Lord that I had the opportunity to use my life in that manner. As a showman, not maybe across a stage, but maybe across a comic book, several comic books, maybe more than that. And I've had a wonderful time with it because it turned out that that's what I really wanted to do. I was performing. Spider-Man is performing.
Another book which you created was, of course, the Fantastic Four.
Yes.
Now, where did they come from?
Fantastic Four, they're a conglomerate of people, different types. My job was to sell books. I couldn't and I wouldn't make the same bunch twice. I wouldn't draw the same bunch twice. And so the Fantastic Four became a conglomerate of people who did different things. Usually, I'm associated with, the readers have associated me with Ben Grimm.
I wonder why.
And I think in a way they're right. See? Now Ben Grimm talks and acts just like I do. But of course, you know, he's a monstrosity, and I can still wear a suit and look like everybody else. But Ben Grimm is a natural guy. But for showy purposes, he's perfect. And he certainly does the things that I wish that I could do. Say,
Yeah.
and he can tear an ash can up like we do paper, you know, and he can rescue people in manners that we can't. See, he can rip off the side of a building and maybe get the tenants out because it's going to explode. Ben Grimm can do it.
Yeah.
Other people, it would take many, many hours, see, and of course make the accidents unavoidable. What Ben Grimm did was shorten that time and solve the problem quicker than most people could.
I suspect there's also a lot of you in Sergeant Fury.
Sergeant Fury was WW2.
Yeah. A cigar chomping, no nonsense, get the heck out of my way.
Well, I was a combat infantryman.
Right.
I was with Patton's 5th Division. And whatever Sergeant Fury did, I did. I did it in the Losers. Like I said, I mentioned that tape. And there were other things. And I put not exactly my own war experiences, which gave the strip a little authenticity, but I put my own feelings down. First of all, I was glad to be back, and I was glad to be alive. I didn't know how it happened. What happened was I froze my feet, and I was unconscious for days. I was lying in the snow. In fact, my whole battalion just conked out. You know, you can lay in the snow just for so long without any hotels around. So my feet were a nice deep purple. And I remember being in the hospital, and some of the DC editors came up to visit me. And by that time, I felt so fiercely annoyed. I told them to get out of my room. These guys were editors. Here I am, an artist, talking back to editors.
Now you were drafted along like Mort Weisinger and other editors.
I was in the same truck with Mort Weisinger. And Mort Weisinger didn't know how he got drafted. And he was saying it aloud, you know, while we were in the truck. And we were all headed for the POE, which is the port of embarkation in Boston. And there was a big convoy waiting with 25 ships. And but Mort Weisinger didn't go overseas. And so all
he was an editor.
Well, he was an editor. Yes. Me, they quickly put me on a ship. And everybody was lying out on deck. There were 2,000, 3,000 guys lying on a deck, and there was no room to walk. And I had to sleep, and so I happen to be Jewish, but I know the chaplains are supposed to have mercy. So on anybody, so I asked the chaplain if I could sleep in his room. If he had any space, I would just lie down anywhere. And of course, the chaplain was very kind to me, and I found space on his ship where I could just fall asleep.
That's great.
So it was a wonderful experience to me, you know, to involve myself with humanity in general. People certainly, I met people who, not of my own kind, and they look at me and they'd say, "What's a Brooklyn?" And things like that. Communications weren't as they are today. There were no airlines. I know, and there were no roadways where thousands of cars would go back and forth across the United States. Communications were rare. Texans never saw New Yorkers. Midwesterners never saw Texans. And Californians certainly didn't see anybody.
They preferred it that way.
Well, we got along, and at any rate, we all had one objective. And
to get home.
well, certainly, we did the best we could,
Yeah.
and I seemed to get along with them, and it went on that way aboard ship, and it went on that way. Well, it went on that way. We landed in Liverpool, and I got to see Liverpool at night. It was a grand sight because Liverpool was a wreck, and we went on from there.
Before we get to the other question, we'll open up the phone lines to the group mind. Our guest tonight, again, is Jack Kirby, one of the preeminent figures in comic book history. Our phone number is 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK, if you want to talk to Mr. Jack Kirby, and you had some more stuff in the meanwhile.
Oh, don't even tell me you're coming back to me for a question.
I was surprising as you're so awake.
Okay, let's see what I have in here. When you first started working in comics in the early days, what were the working conditions like, and the pay, and
Well,
could you make a living working?
it was the reason I stuck to comics, because I managed to bring home some money. And that was my mother's orders.
Mm-hmm.
Bring home some money. And of course, whatever your mother told you to do, you did.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, in comics, I began to make money. And I found out the better comics I did, the more money I made. And so I worked very, very, like I told you, I worked very hard. And my comics began to make money for the publishers, and I became deeply involved in the field with Joe Simon and whoever else was there. I knew all the early artists and the editors, and I knew Mort Weisinger well. I knew Murray Boltnoff and whoever was at Timely, and yes, I knew Julie Schwartz very well. So it was a good and decent and honest way to make money, and doing the thing I like best, telling stories. So I was carrying on a sort of family tradition, because that's what my family did. And telling stories was a way of easing your way of life. My father came from a very rigid discipline. My father was from the Austrian aristocracy, and but my mother was a peasant.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. But the point is that aristocracy or peasant, what they did best was tell stories. And of course, they would tell stories under the street lamps. They would tell stories, all the folk tales that they learned in Europe were transferred to the young people that they bore here. Demons were real. So Dracula was as real to me as any horror could be, that was real horror. Remember, there was a time when we never had penicillin. I caught double pneumonia. Okay? I'm lying there on a bed. I'm a 9-year-old boy. And 10 rabbis are dancing around my bed.
Not a good sign.
And they're all saying, "Come out of this boy, demon. What's your name, demon? Don't hurt this boy, demon." And they were saying that in Yiddish, of course. And this kind of thing was very real. And I think it added to the type of storytelling that I would do later on in life, because my characters to me were real, just as they were to these Europeans. And the Europeans at that time were really aristocracy of peasants who would sit around fires. I'm sure Bram Stoker, who wrote Dracula, probably sat in with those peasants in Europe and listened to their stories around the fire, and he might have come back with Dracula.
Could very well be. We're taking calls now at 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK, and you're on the air.
Hi, as long as you're talking about demon, I was wondering, I think you touched a little bit on what might have been your inspiration for that. And also, what do you think about the future of computers and graphics? Do you think that's the way everything's going to go? And have you ever used any for graphics?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the word computers, is that it?
Yeah,
computers.
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 Yes.
Well, I think computers are machines that are waiting to do something. We don't know what it is they want to do, see, but we're helping them along. And one of these days they won't need our help. And that kind of day is going to be very uncertain for us. It's going to make things uncertain. And I think computers are going to become, in fact, they are a very important part of our lives. You're asking a very, very valid question.
Okay. Thank you for calling.
You didn't ask the other part of the question, John.
Oh, we'll get the call first, and we'll pick that up.
Let's take this call.
You're on hour 25. Go ahead.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi, it's Jack Kirby. Are you, you're from New York, and are you, touring here? Because I went to your comic convention around, and you were there, but I missed it. So where are you here for, just for vacation or what?
Oh, I've been to California for the last 20 years now.
Oh.
And I've enjoyed living in California thoroughly, and I don't know what'll happen tomorrow, but I think I'm still going to be in California.
Do you have any business here?
My business has been here for the last 20 years, as I said.
Oh.
And I'm rarely idle.
All right. Thank you. Now, you and I, Larry, had no business being here at all.
No, at all.
And what was the other question that we didn't follow up on?
I think the gentleman asked, as long as we're talking about demons, if you could say something about the creation of Demon, the demon comic.
Well, there is no such thing as the creation of demons. All right?
Genesis 1:1.
The devil has been here with us a long, long time. In fact, as long as the angels and God. It's man's evil and man's virtue, I believe, living side by side. And man has taken evil and virtue and given us many ways to look them over, to examine ourselves. That's what we really do when we write. We talk to others and we examine ourselves. What is evil and what is virtue? We'll probably never know, but it makes life interesting, and I believe it makes magazines to sell.
Okay. You're in hour 25 at 818-985-5735 with Jack Kirby. Go ahead.
Oh, how do you do? I would like to ask a couple of questions. The first one has to do with, do you know of any good women who are creators of comics? And the second question is, could you please talk about women as heroes in comics? And I will hang up so you can answer.
Thank you.
I've always had the highest respect for women as people, certainly, and I've always used them in comics as in the same manner that I've used my male characters. Women are women are heroines and villainesses, just as contend with virtue and evil, even as men do. There's no difference between us except physical structure, in my mind.
You've actually created some very memorable female characters. Sif in Thor.
Yes.
Barda.
Yes, Big Barda.
Yeah.
I happen to like big girls, and Big Barda was a natural type of girl for me to draw. If you'll dig into this a little deeper, in a psychological way, you'll find that short men like large women. And if you'll notice my wife, she's maybe an inch or two taller than I am.
And he's not about to throw a brick at you, I believe.
Yes.
And the first part of the question the caller had was about women working in comics now. Which would you look at as being sort of the top field?
Well, I've always expected women to work in comics. Women always have.
Mm-hmm.
There was I forget her second name, but when I was a young man, there was a young woman named Marie who was doing comics, and she was a sister of one of the fellow artists. She was one of the first women in comics, and she did excellent work. There's no reason for women not to do comics.
Because you work with Jeanette Kahn too, I understand.
Yes. Jeanette Kahn is another example of women involved in comics. And Jeanette Kahn does a wonderful job as a publisher. Women, I think women should engage in, and have the chance to engage in, whatever kind of profession that they have in mind, and do the best they can.
We are at 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK, talking to Jack Kirby. Now,
as for women artists or writers working in comics,
well, Christy
Marks is one, Wendy Peeney is another.
Yeah,
that's right.
Working on ElfQuest. There was a husband and wife team, and Marie is the name I remember. John Romita? Marie?
No.
Marie Severin.
Marie Severin.
Yeah.
And John Severin.
Right.
And Nesenti, who does Daredevil, and many others.
There's not many women working as writers or artists in comics. There's more working on the publishing or editorial end of it.
Now, there's a connection between...
I don't know why.
But it's their prerogative. It's their prerogative. It is drawing comics is not withheld from them. If they want to draw comics, fine. If they want to do other things in comics, I found that they were always welcome to do that.
You're on hour 25 with Jack Kirby. Go ahead.
Hello. Hello?
Hello.
Hello. Let me turn this radio off. Jack, I heard you speaking something about laying in the snow, and what were you referring to?
My feet were purple. In fact, I had to crack open my coat.
Yeah, well, you were lucky they didn't cut them off.
Well, they couldn't cut my coat off. They had to crack it open.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a real quickie, since you're a humor man. We were up there, too, and the snow was pretty bad, and I won't mention any ranks or anything, but someone stole somebody else's sleeping bag, and the only sleeping bag that had feather downs inside of it. So the guy takes, and he steals this other guy's bag, and he takes his pants off, he gets in the bag, and he had diarrhea. Well, when he woke up, the next...
You're in hour 25. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Dave from out in the Inland Empire.
Yeah?
Say hello to Jack. And I was wondering, I have a question for him. Have you met Will Eisner?
Will Eisner was one of the people I worked with at a very early date. I worked with Will Eisner when he and Sam Iger ran a studio, and I was just a young artist.
So he helped you out early in your career?
Yes, he did.
What's Stan Lee like?
Will Eisner is an industrious guy.
Okay, we got that one. Thank you for calling, caller. You're in hour 25. Go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering, Jack, regarding Captain America, if there's no need for him today, what would Steve Rogers be doing?
Steve Rogers would be doing something heroic.
For the environment, perhaps?
Yes. He'd probably be testing a new kind of plane, a new vehicle of some kind, or he'd be doing something for the government that would require people who like a dangerous environment. Steve Rogers is that kind of a guy.
I see. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We're at 818-985-5735, and you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Jack Kirby. Always been a fan of your big splash pages. Always love those. And wanted to ask you two questions. What artists now do you think are hot, and which ones aren't? And what are you going to do now with all your artwork now that you got it back from who was it? Marvel.
Marvel.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't get all of it back, but what I did get back, I was grateful for. And I leave the disposition of the artwork to my wife. In fact, I leave everything to my wife. And I just draw a bit and eat sandwiches.
And who do you think right now are the up-and-coming artists or writers?
All the artists that I've noticed are just wonderful. They send me the latest magazines from all the publishing houses, and they top the magazines of my day to a degree that astound me. The paper is so good.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of paper we got, well, you could use it in the bathroom and it would be great.
Like our first caller.
So the magazines today are wonderfully produced. They're wonderfully written, and they're wonderfully illustrated. I can't say too much about their quality.
Although I've noticed a number of the artists working today, every so often you'll turn a page in a Marvel comic, you'll look at Thor in a particular pose and go, he's doing Jack Kirby.
Well, I've seen spots once or twice where the figure was actually traced, but you can't. Somehow, I don't blame the artist for it. Mm-hmm. He wants to keep that kind of a mood in the strip. If it had been a motion picture, he might have, for instance, if he made another Star Wars, he might want to keep the same mood of the first Star Wars mm-hmm. in the second picture. And so I think some of these fellows want to keep that mood and maybe build upon it. I see nothing wrong with it.
All right. Thank you for calling. Bye. And you're in hour 25. Go ahead.
Yeah, good evening. Thank you, Jack, for many hours of healthy introspection. And I have two questions, actually. One on automobility, not referring to the current automobile, but what you think about the future of the automobile, or automobility in general.
Well, that usually resolves itself. In other words, that's never up to us. It's always up to the companies, and and how conventional they are. Maybe one day they'll do something radical, and we'll have an automobile that hovers above the street and flies above the traffic.
Fantastic car. What's your next question?
I'm thinking also about energy and things like this, the need for change along those lines, and mass consumption.
Yes.
Yeah. What's the second question?
Second question is, you mentioned something earlier about the Bible, and you were mentioning Genesis, and a couple other things went by. And I was wondering how much you draw on the biblical superheroes, men like David and guys like that. Do they figure in prominently anywhere?
Yes, they do. Biblical figures have always been self-evident everywhere. And Samson was your first superhero.
Uh-huh.
And Samson, of course, did things other men couldn't. Samson was your first Superman. He could do the same things that Superman did. He could do the same things that Captain America did. And of course, all of us have read the Bible or been told about the Bible in some way. We've absorbed it, and it's part of us. So it'll come out in our drawings and in whatever we build or talk about.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Where was the first tennis game played?
You got me.
When David played in King Solomon's courts.
Get out of here.
All right. You're on the air. Go ahead.
I learned how to read reading Jack Kirby teamed up with Stan Lee with Marvel Comics in the early 60s. So it's sort of an honor for me. My question is, and I don't think this has been talked about, how was the collaboration, which to me was the modern age of comics, started with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's working together? How did that either come about, and how did that develop in terms of how you wrote a story?
I wrote the story. I wrote the complete story. I drew the complete story. And after I came in with the pencils, the story was given to an inker. An inker would ink the story, and a letterer would letter it. And I would give the story to Stanley or whoever had the editor's chair, and I would leave it there. I would tell him the kind of story I would do to follow up, and then I went home and I would do that story. And I wouldn't come into the office until I had that story finished. And nobody else had to work on a story with me.
Okay. That's a little bit of a surprise. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It's the revision of history that's been going on at Marvel for the last few years.
Yeah, well.
You're in hour 25 with Jack Kirby at 818-985-5735. Go ahead.
I can't believe it. I'm standing at 2 payphones. Oh, Jack Kirby, you're the greatest. When I was like 13 years old, 12 years old, like the whole world opened up to me. The guy Butch Sproul turned me onto these comic books: Captain America, Spider-Man, The Incredible Hulk. It was like a whole world, and I stayed with it for years. And God,
I take it you're a fan.
Jack, you're the best. I love you, Jack.
Well, believe me, it's all returned to you, and I love you too. And if you read any of my books, I appreciate that fact, and I have no words to express how wonderful that kind of thing helps my own spirit.
Jack, don't put those pens down. If you ever hear any story in your head, just do it, because it doesn't matter what anybody else says. There's people out there who care about what you write, and it means a lot to them. And there's kids out there right now who need to hear those stories. And like wherever you get your inspiration from, Jack, it's a great place.
All right, thank you for calling.
Thanks a lot, Jack. I love you. Take care.
Bye.
Hang up them phones.
I think he liked the work. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Bill in West LA.
Hi, Bill.
Hi. I'm doing artwork myself now for a living professionally. I just wanted to say that when I was first starting to be drawn, into that back in grammar school, you were a tremendous influence on me, Mr. Kirby. Your work, it really meant a lot to me. We would be in class and there's kids gluing macaroni on the paper, and I'm over in the corner drawing Darkseid. It's kind of hard to explain, but secondly, I was kind of wondering, I was a great fan of the New Gods saga, though, the Fourth World series. I was wondering if you could say a few words about the source and how the idea for that came about in your mind. Because I was always really intrigued by the source. It's kind of
The sauce, like everything else, is an everyday fact. We live. The sources lives with us day by day. We don't know what the source is, where it is. We can't identify its form, but we know it's there. This thing, this tremendous thing governs our lives, and somehow we can all feel it inside. It's referred to as spiritual. It's referred to in many other ways, but we know instinctively that it's there, and that's what I put down in my stories, because like everybody else, I felt this thing, and I felt that it was real, and I've kept it with me all my life.
All right, thank you for calling.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. You're an hour 25 with Jack Kirby. Go ahead.
Hi, Jack. How you doing?
Just fine.
Since Batman's success, there's been a lot of movies coming around, I guess, with this superhero type thing. Is there anything to do with the Punisher coming out? I understand Dolph Lundgren is going to be some Punisher thing, or is there?
Well, that's a decision of Marvel's. I don't know when it'll be made, or who is going to.
Sorry. Last I heard, it has been made, and it's going to cassette, I understand.
Oh, I see.
It's only cassette only?
Apparently.
Oh.
Yeah, we shelved because Dolph Lundgren's picture, Red Scorpion, went right into the dumper, and they didn't want to release another picture with Dolph Lundgren.
Oh, okay. Is there some sort of tie-in with fascination with superheroes right now for the movies, or is it just because Batman made so much money? They're going to start to go overboard with this kind of stuff.
Well, my guess it was Batman who generated the trend. I think the trend will continue, and you'll see good ones made and bad ones made. But the trend will continue, and the superhero has and always will be part of the American scene. And of course, today he's visual. And I believe that he'll stay visual and in motion.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. And you're an hour 25. Go ahead.
Yes, I want to be quick about this because I don't want to get to Mr. Kirby's time, but I believe John Severin, whose fine work on King Carl as the artist and Marie as a colorist, they're not, however, husband and wife. I believe they're brother and sister. I'm fairly sure about that. I'm not positive, but I think they're brother and sister.
I think you're right.
All right, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, there's a connection between you and Mr. Kirby, which maybe Jack isn't even aware of.
No, Jack and I talked about
you
it
did?
beforehand, yeah.
Well,
Are you going to bring up the giant worms coming out of the earth again?
I must bring it up. I'll explain the background.
When I was working at Ruby Spears as a writer, Jack was working there doing conceptions and models and all of his creative things. And the first day I was there, Joe Ruby said, I have this terrific idea for you to work on, Larry. Giant worms coming up out of the earth, devouring cities. And I said, why did I ever quit my last job and come here with this cigar-smoking madman who wants me to do giant worms coming out of the earth? 65 episodes of giant worms coming up out of the earth. But the one great thing about it was Jack Kirby artwork, which would come over the transom, and I'd get all these wonderful Xeroxes of all these terrific machines and these terrific characters, and that was wonderful. Now that series never got made.
What'd you think of this worm stuff?
Well, like anything else, it was a story to tell. You could do it well. You could do it in a mediocre fashion. Yeah. It depends on the storyteller.
But you couldn't do it for 65 episodes.
Well,
I was convinced of that.
Of course, that's an opinion. We all have our own opinion, and I think we're all entitled to them. And somehow, maybe someday, we may see those worms, or we may not. I don't think it's going to change our lives one way or the other.
I think did you do the conceptions on Centurions as well?
I believe so.
Yeah, because I worked on Centurions as well.
Yes.
At the Ruby Spears, which actually was a very good show, both in artwork and writing. Yeah. But it went right off the air because it was the end of end of the toy days.
Well, it was out of my hands. It was, the conceptions were as far as I went.
How do you like the new superheroes in the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even as far as the 60s? The superheroes had a kind of innocence to them. There was, they were less human up until the Fantastic Four started.
They're deadly now.
Yeah, they'll
deadly.
kill you.
Yes, and they're violent now.
Yeah.
They want to do the real thing. So, I think that I think that very pleasant type of feeling has gone out of the comic. I mean, if
you can almost not call them comic anymore.
Well, if you see the illustration of somebody choking some guy, it's going to be the real thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this guy is going to look like, he's being constricted, and they're going to make this one panel will stick out of the entire story, and you lose your train of thought. You lose the rest of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Some fellow feels that this is the kind of picture he likes to draw, and he'll draw it so well that it will attract the reader to this one panel, and in doing so, the artist will lose the rest of the story, because the rest of the story will never match that panel. That panel will jump right out of the story, and the reader will concentrate on it. And of course, I feel that it's a loss for the artist, that the entire story matters.
We have about 3 minutes left.
Yes.
There are those now trying to revive the campaign. The comic books are evil and not good for people, all this sort of thing.
Frederick Wortham did in the 50s.
Yeah, what's your response to those people who are, again, trying to revive this idea that comics are bad for you?
I think it's wrong. I think it's up to us to decide what's good for us. If it's going to hurt you, you'll feel it, and you won't continue. I think they ought to give you that choice. I think that comic books, like any other literature, when it's done by good men, will give you the thrill of a lifetime. And who can compare, say, an adventure like Moby Dick and stories like that with, say, mediocre fiction of the hard book kind. So there is outstanding literature, and there are stories that fade away. It will always remain that way. We can't stop it.
All right. We are out of time. It's been a terrific 2 hours. What? Rats. I know. We appreciate you coming down here to the station, Mr. Kirby. It's been a genuine pleasure for all of us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, surely, and you people have been very nice. And
although I'm sorry,
I don't know what to do about
you
it.
stopped smoking cigars.
No, I
know it's better for you, but
and I probably would have melted your walls.